Welcome you all to our Writing a New Story for the Middle East, leveraging a platform for deliberative democracy powered by AI. My name is Caroline Mays. I am the Executive Director of New Story Leadership. And before we begin, I do want to just give a moment to acknowledge today is September 11th and just sort of the heaviness of the day and the heaviness that we're all going through currently at the moment. And it is my hope, our hope, that by the end of this session, we are able to leave you all with some glimmer of hope. So about New Story Leadership, for 14 years, we have been bringing young Israeli Palestinian leaders to Washington, D.C. For 2 months each summer for an intensive leadership program. And 14 years later, our alums have grown into the leaders that we knew that they would. And you will hear today the work that we have done this year with our alumni in drafting the Phoenix Plan, which is a bold vision and a comprehensive and holistic plan for the future of the region. And you will hear today from two of our alumni and drafters, Rowan O'Day and Iran Nissan. And you'll also hear from Tariq, who is our facilitator extraordinaire and AI specialist, who will be sharing more about the process of how we will be using deliberative technology tools to expand our scope of the Phoenix Plan. So part of this session today, in terms of the process, you'll hear the stories from Iran and Rowan, and telling sort of their collective reaction to October 7th and what they intend to do to ensure a better future. Rowan does need to leave early, so just letting you all know that. So she'll go first. And please stay tuned, because at the end of the session, we will be doing a sampling of our digital democracy tool, Polis, with Tariq. And please, throughout the session, if you have any questions, just to drop them in the chat. So I will now pass this off to Rowan.
Thanks, Caroline. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm actually curious where you all are joining in from. So if you wanted to say hi in the chat and which part of the world you're in, that would be awesome. I am from Palestine and New York. Just funny, I always say New York because if it's a country, it is a whole world. And before we go into the incredible brave work that me and my fellow alumni have been working on, I wanted to share a bit about my story and how I fit in. I come from a village in Area C of the West Bank called Hawara. You might have heard of it in the news. It was recently part of a pogrom where settlers came and burnt down our village. But my story doesn't start in Hawara, it starts in Brooklyn, New York. My family immigrated to the United States when I was just 3 years old, and we were your typical immigrant family. I did my parents' taxes really early on. I still have PTSD from that. You can ask my partner, will not touch it. And throughout my time growing up as the Palestinian, as the Arab in the United States, I never truly felt seen. And today represents a very significant day for all Americans and people in the Middle East. It's September 11th. When that day hit and the tragedy that erupted in New York, my dad was a construction worker who worked in Manhattan, and I thought that he may have lost his life. I felt like the victim, but overnight, we became the enemy. And as a young child, I felt this urge to hide who I was, hide my identity, hide that I was Arab, Palestinian, and Muslim. And what a horrible act of a few people did turned out to be detrimental to millions of lives. We see the same exact scenario playing out in Israel-Palestine today. What I was doing and experiencing as a young child was my response to Islamophobia, a word that I didn't really know, that I didn't realize that's what it was. And my family also didn't know how to navigate me wanting identity and who I was. And so they made the drastic, some would say, I would say, decision to move us back to Hawara. the small village that I came from. At age 15, we packed our bags from our tiny little one-bedroom apartment in New York City. We hopped on a plane to start our new life in Hawata. Hawata, as I said, is an Area C of the West Bank. What that means is we are not controlled by the Palestinian Authority, the representative government of Palestine. Instead, our day-to-day is controlled by the Israeli army. On top of that, our village is surrounded by illegal Israeli settlements. And within those settlements, there are lots of extreme settlers that oftentimes disrupt our daily lives, while soldiers dictate our daily lives. You know, as a teenager, I was very feisty. You have to be in Brooklyn. And I took that with me in Hawata. And what that meant was me speaking up whenever I saw injustice. When I saw young kids being arrested in the streets, I took a stand and communicated with the soldiers that that was not okay. And with that came my deep desire to understand why my community had the experience that we did and why the international community wasn't doing enough. And so I understood that a big part of the issue is that our voices aren't included in any discussion when it comes to solutions for Israel-Palestine. And so after living in Hawata for a few years, going to university, I decided to make it my mission to include Palestinian voices in the circles where it matters most in Washington, D.C. And that's how I found News Story Leadership. I was a participant in 2017, and with our program, we're placed within Israelis and Palestinians are placed together to live with American host families in Washington, D.C. We intern in Congress, and we share our stories with decision makers all across the political spectrum. And so I took my story, the story of my brother getting arrested at age 12 playing outside. I took my story about how unsafe it feels to walk the streets because there are settlers who are running without impunity. And with that, I understood that we really need to be included in these conversations. One thing I'll leave us with in terms of my personal connection and experiences, how I've been impacted since October 7th. I talked a few times about the Israeli settlers, and to survive in Palestine, in the village that I come from, you're taught very early on that if you see an Israeli soldier, you put your head down and you pray for your life. If you see an Israeli settler, you run for your life. Since the tragedy of October 7th and the war that has erupted since then, the experience of Palestinians in the West Bank with unrecognizable villages has been absolutely horrific with the violence that we have experienced. And these settlers are running around with impunity. This is only one piece to such a complicated, comprehensive puzzle of how it has impacted the lives of both Palestinians and Israelis. And I look forward to sharing more, but I will stop and pass it along to Iran.
Thank you, Rowan. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Iran Nissan. I'm doing this Zoom call from Tel Aviv, Israel. It's dark outside. I'm in my office. I'm an Israeli peace activist. I was born and raised in Israel. I'm the youngest of three brothers. We all served as combat soldiers in the Israeli army. I served in the special forces. I was in the K9 unit. I had my own personal bomb detection dog, and I was sent to carry out missions. I served on the Gaza border. I served up north on the Israel-Lebanon and the Israeli-Syrian border, and I served in the West Bank as well. And I went to the Israeli army with this conviction, with this realization that we are in an active war zone, that I need to defend my family and I need to defend my country because I grew up, I was born in the middle of what we call the first intifada, the intifada being the Palestinian uprising against the Israeli occupation. And I grew up, my formative years were during the second intifada, where daily attacks were happening all throughout Israel. And from the Israeli perspective, the Israeli society perspective, these attacks are perceived and are categorized as terrorism because they target civilian targets, so cafes and malls. And I remember growing up with on one hand, having a very normal childhood with school and friends and playing football, but also having this daily reminder that I live in a very extraordinary circumstances. The education system in Israel pushes you to perceive Palestinians as the enemy, as the other. And I haven't met Palestinians growing up, and I wasn't taught about not just Palestine, but also the Palestinian narratives. And the only characterization of Palestinians that mainstream Israelis get is through the media. And it's a very negative one. So when I went on my first mission, and as a result of being an active combat soldier, I carried out a lot of missions, and I come to find out that the angry, armed Palestinian enemy that I was expecting to find was not all the people, the population who were there, but that 99% of the human beings I met were human beings, people who reminded me of my cousins and my nephews and my grandparents. And during my military service, I experienced what I call a personal political crisis. And when I was released from the army, I decided that I want to take a more active role in putting an end to the cycle of violence and putting an end to the Israeli occupation of Palestinians. Not because at that time I cared or loved or felt empathy towards the Palestinians, but rather because I saw what it's doing to my society and my country, and specifically my generation. And so I started volunteering as a peace activist. I worked for an organization called Peace Now, which is Israel's biggest and oldest peace movement advocating for the two-state solution. And through my peace activism, I found to participate in different programs and meeting for the first time Palestinians my age. And I developed this generational perspective about my reality. And I found that I'm starting to see reality not just as a conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, Muslims and Jews, Arabs and Jews, but there's also a generational divide that on one side, there's us, the people, my generation, Israelis and Palestinians, and on the other hand, the other side were our parents and our grandparents, specifically those who hold political power, and that our stories and our voices are not heard, are not, and our future and our interests are not being weighed when they decide what's going to happen with us. Through the programs, I found New Story Leadership. I took part in the 2019 delegation. I interned in Congress for Congressman Jamie Raskin. It was transformational for me on a personal, emotional, but also in my career path. And when I came back, I knew that this is something that I want to deepen. On the side, I'm also an ambulance driver, and I did my master's in emergency and disaster management. And on October 7th, I was with my wife in southern Israel. And I spent that traumatic and horrible day in a hospital, in an emergency room, helping to treat casualties and survivors. Since that day and the horrible war that erupted, I spend my time in my day job where I run an organization that focuses on digital activism in order to advocate for our shared future, to advocate for the end of the war, for a political process that will take our interests in mind, for the return of the hostages, for the alleviating of all the human suffering, and for a process that would be supported by the international community that will hold those responsible for our suffering accountable. And this is why I take part in these kinds of programs and these kinds of spaces, because on October 7th, in the midst of the most horrible day that my country, but also myself have experienced, the people who checked on me and sent me a message to see that I was safe and that my family was safe were the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Americans, the British that are part of this ecosystem. And specifically those people that I participated together in New Story Leadership, reaching out to me and saying, we're in this together. And we are in this together. So I'm gonna stop here I'm gonna turn it back, and I welcome you to ask questions. You know, Rawan and I, we go way back. We're accustomed to answer personal, professional, political questions. So you can use the chat to really ask whatever you want.
Yes, we have time for just a few questions if you're interested.
I see we have people from Ireland and Morocco, Northern Ireland. So there are active conflicts, not so active conflicts. I think that there is a shared experience of what it means to grow up where you don't have a safe life. By the way, my shirt says in Hebrew and in Arabic, we deserve better than this. I think this is the sentiment not only of this event and this meeting, but also what we're trying to advocate for.
I also have to just shout out Monterey, because one of our core supporters was one of the managers of the program is from Monterey. Her name is Maya Pollock. Chip, you might know her. Totally random, but just to fill in space as people get comfortable with unmuting and asking us a question or two.
We are also great with awkward silences. That's totally fine.
Yes.
They teach that you need to give 7 seconds of silence to get the people who are thinking if they want to jump in or not. So.
Well, great. Well, we will have more opportunities for question and answers later on in the session. So, Rawan, would you like to tell us a bit more about the Geneva process?
Yeah, absolutely. So as both Iran and I shared with you all today very vulnerably, the October 7th war hit us so deeply. I mean, we have alumni across Gaza who have lost countless lives. We have alumni in Israel who've seen their friends killed at the Nova Festival. There's a saying that goes, almost everyone in Israel lost someone or knows someone who lost someone. The same goes for Palestine. And we as alumni understood that not doing is not an option. We wanted to find a sense of meaning, belonging, that we have to be part of the answer, because there is so many people who don't even have the emotional strength or capacity to engage in what we have done collectively. So when the war erupted, we knew first and foremost that far too many lives will be killed if we don't demand a ceasefire immediately. We were the first joint group of Israelis and Palestinians to write a joint statement calling for a ceasefire. We took that document in Congress and demanded that congressional members join us. And there is a lot of power when you have Israelis and Palestinians together speaking up for something. We actually convinced quite a few members of Congress to join us in calling for a ceasefire. And in that process, we understood that a ceasefire is absolutely critical. It is needed now more than ever. There should be no excuses. But it is only one part of the solution. If we don't address the core issues that has kept us from unlocking the deadlock in Israel-Palestine, this war will repeat again and again and again, and we absolutely cannot have that happen. So as alums, we started on Zoom talking through what can we do together. And we decided to create our version of a Marshall Plan that lays out a comprehensive framework to unlock the deadlock issues of the conflict. Here we are on Zoom. We love a good Zoom. COVID taught us that, but we understood that we needed it to be in person. And so we met in Geneva for 5 days and put together this incredible document that has so much emotion within it, because we built consensus around every single word in that document. Through the process, we learned that obviously divides don't only exist between Israelis and Palestinians, but in our own national societies as well. And so some of my roughest conversations actually came with my Palestinian colleagues. And through that process, we laid out 5 areas of opportunity. These opportunities are divided as the reconstruction of Gaza, Palestinian leadership and Israeli leadership, the role of the international community, accountability and restorative justice, preparing the public for peace, and the role of the international community. And our document, as an FYI, is about 65 pages, and we won't go through all 65 today, but we hope to share it with you towards the end of our call. But I do want to give you guys a feel of the approaches inside of the document, and I'll do it like speed round style. So starting with Gaza reconstruction, the way we see it, there's obviously the actual reconstruction, the physical reconstruction of Gaza that will take billions of dollars to come to life. What's important for us as youth is to make sure that reconstruction is holistic. When we say reconstruction, we also mean the human, oh, sorry, I got like a pop-up on my Zoom and it distracted me. The reconstruction that we see also connects to trauma therapy and education and making sure that we are rebuilding Gaza with human needs in mind. We also want to see an environmental lens applied in how we rebuild Gaza. And I'll end with, in this first part, the most important thing to us is that it is Gazan-led. Palestinians from Gaza are so resilient. They have rebuilt Gaza time and time again, and we want to make sure that process centers them. With Palestinian and Israeli leadership, something that you guys see unfolding every single day in the news, we don't really have the leaders that can bring us to a sustainable end to the conflict, but there are steps that we can take. On the Palestinian side, we want to see a transitional government of experts to take on one of the biggest jobs on the planet, that is reconstruction of Gaza. And we want to see an internalized reconciliation process so that we are unified in our state building efforts. On the Israeli side, we want to see more accountability measurements and checks and balances so that the Israeli people have more power in seeing the future that they want to see. Now, the role of the international community, you all are part of them, and it's a big word that's thrown out a lot. In the Phoenix Plan, when we say international community, we don't mean one thing. We actually mean 10 different representative groups that include religious communities, obviously governments, corporate and tech companies, and we've outlined specific roles that we see them playing. Now, with accountability and restorative justice and restorative justice. Obviously, both sides have gone through incredible trauma that will take years and years to heal. But without a national framework to address that, we don't see the cycle of violence ending. So we have laid out a framework of transitional justice mechanisms that give both Israelis and Palestinians the opportunity to heal collectively and also individually. And finally, preparing the public for peace. Iran and I are peace builders, and we recognize that our community, our ecosystem needs a lot more support and also reforming the way we approach peace building. I'll end with this last point, and that is in peace building, there's someone from Northern Ireland and Ireland on the call today. In the Northern Irish conflict, the International Fund for Ireland invested about $44 per person per capita in peace building efforts. In the chat, I want you all to guess what that number is like, what that number is for Palestinian and Israeli peace building. Bonus points if you go first.
I can write, but I know the answer.
Okay, yep, $0. Close. That's a close answer. It is $1.50 per person per capita. So nowhere near where it needs to be. And us gathering here today at PeaceCon kind of represents the power of what we need to see scaling up peace building. And with that, I will pass it back to Iran, I believe.
So, my main point is that when we met in Geneva and we did weeks of homework of gathering before, while we saw since October, we saw a lot of these spaces of Israelis and Palestinians, people to people across the border, dialogue work just disintegrate. We saw how the peace ecosystem was falling apart because Palestinian peace builders and peace activists, they expected more condemnation and solidarity from their Israeli counterparts, and the Israelis, they expected something from the Palestinians. And we saw a lot of these spaces that showed how fragile and volatile our reality is, because it's very hard to meet. And especially in times of trauma, we retract back to our communities. But some spaces, including New Story Leadership Space, people leaned in. And when we did our weekly calls before we came to Geneva, it wasn't just for professional work to prepare for Geneva, but it was also for mutual emotional support. And in this homework, we identified the areas of opportunities that we wanted to explore in Geneva, but we also went and met with experts and tried to learn from other conflicts, like the Northern Ireland conflict, like what happened after apartheid fell in South Africa. And the main thing we learned, that the essential component of any sustainable peace process that we want to see is legitimacy. That if we can narrow it to one thing that every peace process that survived and persevered had, and that every political process that failed didn't have, was legitimacy. So everything that we talked about in Geneva was looked at through the lens of how we increase legitimacy. So diversity and inclusion and agency of the participant themselves, but also we recognize the fact that Israelis and Palestinians who have empathy and that shared intimacy and vulnerability with the other side and can take in the narrative and can have a place in their head, but also in their hearts for the pain of the other, is something that is very, very rare. We built into the process, and we set out to put inside of the Phoenix Plan, the implementation strategy, mechanism that would increase the legitimacy within our communities and within the international community. And one of the things that we looked at and we focused on is what is special about our generation. And that is different from other peace processes, like 20 years ago with Camp David and the Oslo process, and even not just in Israel and Palestine, other peace processes from the last century or half a century. And we zoomed in on like Zoom technology. So we had in mind when we got to Geneva, how can we leverage technology in order to increase legitimacy in our process of coming to the Phoenix Plan, but also how we're going to implement it further. So now I'm going to turn to Tarek, who was our facilitator in Geneva and is an honorary participant and an honorary member of the Phoenix team that really guided us through this very, very complicated and challenging process, not just like Rowan said, Israelis and Palestinians, but also within the Israeli group and within the Palestinian group. So Tarek, to you.
Thank you, Eran, and greetings, everyone. Rowan told us about how we convened in Geneva, and I do want to give a shout out to Beit of Hope, who was one of the funders for that program and hosted us during that week in February. If you're familiar with intergroup dialogue practice, it was very much that, only we incorporated already in that week of discussions, we incorporated technologies such as ChatGPT to not only capture what was going on, but help us cluster and organize into themes. And then we would go back and the next day and look through how things, a wide variety of materials, right? Hours and hours of discussions, how those clusterings, that information, aligned with what the participants were looking for. And so in this iterative process of one-on-one in-person real-time discussions, synthesizing it through computational technology, and then redigesting it as participants. That's how we laid the foundations for what became the Phoenix Plan, which we hope to share with you in the chat, so you can directly look at it. And we actually have a GPT for the Phoenix Plan, so you can ask the GPT any questions you want about the Phoenix Plan instead of reading through a nearly 70-page document. Now, during this process in February, it also occurred to us that as exhilarating as it was to get 10 people around and consensus around a comprehensive set of solutions, outcomes, and principles that dealt with a post-war Palestine and Israel, what if we could use technology to be able to expand the reach? And so from that emerged a whole other build-out of our efforts using a deliberative digital peace-building tool called Remesh. Myself, Caroline, a number of us have been attending events put together by the Council for Technology and Social Cohesion, which has been looking at the role that technology has in conflict and how to both mitigate the harms of that technology, but also to leverage the potential for that technology. And so that's what we did, and I'll explain a little bit more of that later. Caroline, I'm going to hand it to you to take it forward with the rollout of the Phoenix Plan once that was finished.
Sorry, I'm muted. Thank you for that, Tarek. Yes, I wanted to share more about how we unveiled, or sort of our process, as this year, we did not host our traditional summer program, and instead, over the summer, we brought 2 delegations of our alumni to DC to promote the Phoenix Plan. And the response and the reception that we did receive far exceeded our expectations. So first, we shared our plan with the State Department, with over 25 congressional offices. We also met with various foreign policy think tanks and other members of the diplomatic community, various embassies. And the response was, again, far more than we expected. In fact, one of the members from the State Department told us that this plan was by far one of the most comprehensive plans that they have seen yet. And they had seen many plans, and it was the only one that had been written by Israelis and Palestinians. And Congressman Jamie Raskin and Congressman Brad Schneider together jointly hosted a congressional forum where they introduced the Phoenix Plan to the House in a 1.5-hour panel session where members and staff were able to listen and to ask questions. So we're very excited with the momentum and the reception that we've received. And we do have plans. This was just the first version of our plan to continue to roll this out. So we have now invitations to continue to share this and have our delegations speak to communities throughout the US, at the UN, in the EU, in Ireland. And we're working to build worldwide support. And we're waiting in our next iteration too, which is where I will turn this over to Tarek, is where we now, for our next versions, we start to include the deliberative AI piece. So I'll turn that over to you, Tarek.
Thanks so much, Caroline. All right, so if you're curious about that plan that Caroline talked about and all the traction that has gotten on the Hill amongst embassies and so forth, in the chat, there's a link to the website where you can get both the Phoenix Plan, the full version, as well as an executive summary. There's also a link to the GPT that I mentioned. Now, for those who aren't familiar, there are increasingly digital deliberation tools out there that can allow you to do peace-building work by capturing the power of online, expansive, synchronous and asynchronous deliberation, and AI computational tools. We decided, amongst the variety of tools, to work with one platform called Remesh. Remesh, which was first founded by Andrew Kanye, who was inspired actually to leave his job as a theoretical physicist because of the conflict that was affecting both Palestinian and Israeli friends of his, and turn his efforts to using the tool set that he was familiar with and turning it towards peace building. And we've been working with him to develop essentially a remesh process that approximates what we did in Geneva as a small group of 10, but can be expanded out to capture and engage millions, which is our ambitious goal with using our Remesh platform. There are a variety of these different platforms that are out there. Just so you know, Polis is another one. And in order to give you a feel of what this kind of platform can do, we want to actually run a Polis deliberation with you. That means each one of you will participate in one of these virtual deliberations. I'm going to send out a link for you to join the deliberation, and I'll put that in the chat right now. So type on that link. We hope that you'll all participate. It'll be a very brief, hold on. There we go. It'll be a very brief deliberation that we'll have. We've decided to pick out some very controversial issues and statements dealing with peace building. Some of them tag onto the debates that occurred last night between Vice President Kamala Harris and the candidate Donald Trump. And so what we're hoping to do is take a very controversial issue and show you how these platforms can actually work to find common ground. So I hope you all have been able to open it. I'm going to share my screen so you can see what it should look like on your screen once you open that link. So I hope you all can see this. This is what it should look like on your screen. I'm going to give you really brief instructions before I ask you to start. And again, we're going to only run this deliberation for 10 or so minutes. You'll see that there's an introduction here at the top. Then there's this card. And actually, I can use a spotlight here. So you can see that there's this card. It asks you a question, and you can either press agree, disagree, or pass. If you don't want to answer the question, you're not sure how you answer the question, etc. And you can go through as many of these cards, agree, disagree, and pass. Right now, there's 4 that we've seeded this conversation with. But you can also share your own thoughts down here in the share your perspective. Here, you might want to create, let's say you kind of agree with this, but not fully, not 100%. Obviously, I work in the peace building field is not such a controversial statement, but there's some that are. If you want to give your full idea, then you can write it into the share your perspective box here. Now make sure that it reads as a full statement. Don't just say yes, or I agree with this or something. It needs to be a full statement, you know, a full complete sentence at least. And then you push submit. When you push submit, it's independent of whether you vote on the card or not. So you can push submit, enter a comment at any time. They're not linked. The card and your submission are not linked together. And then other people will get to vote on your card and maybe respond to your particular comment. So let's try it out. I invite everyone who's on this call, whether you're a participant, you're a host, to go forth, start voting, and then you might be inspired then also to submit a comment. Just make sure, again, that the comment is a complete sentence. Keep it clear and concise to 140 characters. And as you go, you'll see that there will be actually a visualization of what's happening, which I'll explain a little bit more afterwards. All right, I see some people are going. There you go. If you have any questions or concerns, you can just hit me up in the chat box. All right, so you've just participated. I'd love to see a show of hands for whom this was new, the first time you participated in a digital deliberation tool. You can use the reaction function. I think it's got a hand gesture. I particularly wanted to use Polis. One, it's a very simple platform. As you can see, the interface just involves a couple functionalities. And you can open up your own Polis account. It's offered. Polis itself is a nonprofit, and so it's something that you can work, develop, and use free of charge at any point in time. Remesh, as I mentioned before, that one is not free of charge and has a lot more functionality, and that's the one that we are going to be using to develop a post-war plan that involves the input and the common ground found from not 10, but tens of thousands of Palestinians and Israelis. Now, one of the amazing things about both of these platforms is their ability to crunch data. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to close our chat for now and generate a report. Now, this may take some few minutes for the report to be created with the different data that can be pulled from this engagement. So I want to take the moment before we look at that data to see if there are any questions about this deliberative democracy tool and or how we're going to be using that to find common ground around a post-war future. I see some comments in there. People have found this cool. Wish they'd known about it earlier, and certainly that would have liked to have used it or have already used it. Let's see one participant here. Okay, it looks like we do have data. So I'm going to share my screen and show you. Hopefully everyone can see the shared screen with the report of the Polis engagement that we just had. We call it a deliberation. It's not a full dialogue because we weren't talking to each other, so a lot of elements of traditional dialogue that aren't working, but it's also not just a poll. It's not a survey because you're engaging with each other. You're creating content that other people are responding to. And so that's why we call it a deliberation in this process. So first of all, as you can see here, we've got just some basic data. 23 of you participated, and there were 551 votes cast. 35 statements were submitted, 23 votes per statement. So first of all, you might ask, well, how divisive was the conversation? Meaning, how much was there, were there comments that had both a fairly large number of people that agreed and disagreed, right? And we can see here on the left are statements that were non-controversial. So either everyone agreed or everyone disagreed with them. So for example, Palestinians have the right to self-protection and self-determination. That was found to be a consensus statement. All people experience pain of some variety and can be a connecting point for finding shared solutions, right? And the most divisive statement on this end was, I identify as a man. So that was actually not a opinion statement. That was a demographic statement, which we can then use to look at correlations between gender. There was also a question about whether you are in peacebuilding, whether you're based in the United States, and so forth. All right. So we can see right off the bat, one of the things in every single deliberative digital deliberation is that you'll find there's a lot more common ground than you would have thought, given the questions that are asked or the topic at hand. And so we can look at some of the questions that people really agreed with. So we can see that most of our participants here do not identify as men. We can see that most of them do not identify as Republican or conservative. So that gives us a little bit of a demographic sense here. We can see also that most people did not say that race in the upcoming election was a factor that matters to them. This is obviously relevant mostly to the US elections. And a lot of agreement for these different statements here. In this upcoming election, foreign policy specific to the Middle East is a factor that matters to me. So someone submitted that comment, and there was a lot of agreement on that. A lot of agreement on that diplomacy is important by a US president. A lot of agreement around, we talked already about Palestinians having the right of self-protection, self-determination, the US playing a constructive role in the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and so forth. So now one of the interesting and I think valuable and complex data that we can get from deliberative tools is the creation of opinion groups. So in this case, we have three major opinion groups. What it does, the software looks at the voting patterns and starts to clump similar voting patterns together. And the more data that you have, so the more votes that are cast, the more predictive those voting patterns become, so that eventually it can, with very high degree of certainty, tell what any given individual is going to say, how they're going to respond to any upcoming question. Now, in your typical social media mechanism, what gets engagement, raises engagement, is to take statements you disagree with from other opinion groups and feed that onto your screen, or to take statements from inside your opinion group that you agree with and feed that on your screen. And both those things amplify engagement. Well, what this software does, deliberative consensus building software does, is actually it takes statements from other opinion groups that you agree with, right? So inverts the typical algorithm. And these are called bridging algorithms. And they're partly the power behind these digital tools, is they allow us to see common ground that's more meaningful than just agreement within a group, but agreement across groups. And so that's what can be highlighted. These are some of the statements that define the groups. These are some of the areas of uncertainty. And then we'll have a graph that shows us sort of where these three groups landed according to the different statements that were made. But then we can also look at what statements were, crossed the boundaries of the opinion groups as well. So as you can tell, this is a lot of data that it gives you. And using a tool like this, again, we'll be using Remesh, but using a tool like this, we'll be able to bring together from the various solutions and principles and outcomes that the Phoenix Plan holds, we'll be able to bring together those that resonate with a majority, a supermajority, or even a consensus of the many individuals, Palestinian, Israeli, in the region and in the diaspora, that we hope to be engaging. Thank you for checking that out. I'm going to see now if we have any questions about that process, about the data. Okay, I don't see any questions. So then what we can do, we did have two, okay, looks like the Q&A questions, there was typed answers that Iran gave. I want to open it up to any questions you may have, whether it's about the Phoenix Plan itself that was developed, that document and the process that came out with it, or about these the digital deliberation tools more generally, as well as how we plan to be using those to create a Phoenix Plan that represents millions of voices that can then be used to advocate for systemic change in the region. Any questions are welcome, and then we'll close out with one last call to action. Looks like we have one question in the Q&A now that popped up. Okay. Response. All right, we have a question here from Megan, wondering how this would work in conflict zones that have issues with good internet and lack of electricity. Specifically, I'm thinking about Sudan right now. Yeah, so these, certainly an internet connection is needed to do these, but they can be done on phones. And in many of these regions that have leapfrogged over wired service, you have data options that can still work to engage people. I want to give you a sense that this is not something that's totally new. So the UN used Remesh, for example, both in Libya in the transitional justice processes and in Yemen to engage, in Libya, for example, youth. The Minister of Information, Audrey Tang, in Taiwan has used Polis to actually create legislation. Bolivia has used Remesh to do a whole national dialogue process for the country's direction. Many companies use Remesh or Polis, nonprofits as well, even just to do kind of corporate strategic planning. values building, mission building, etc. So so these are tools that can use across a wide variety of settings. And I will also mention that many of them have automatic instantaneous translation. So Remesh, for example, I think is now available in 30 or 40 different languages, so that you have real time. So when we do Remesh for the Israeli-Palestinian question, the post-war plan, we are going to be doing that simultaneously, Hebrew, Arabic, and English. Let me see what any of the questions are. Privacy concerns, very astute point. So this is something that is of great concern to the technology companies that work here. So as you know, you just participated in something and your name wasn't attached to any of your responses, so it was anonymous. There are ways then that you can build up like a sign-in features that both is anonymous, but also then avoids hacking to ensure that the validity of the data that you're collecting. I think the specifics of that are a little bit beyond the scope of this session, but we'll put our contact information. Actually, maybe Alex, if you put the contact information or someone, and you can come back and check in with us. Is this being used as an educational activity in online courses and higher education? I'm sure it is. I have used it at a number of universities as part of trainings and workshops. I don't know how pervasive that is across academia, though. Are you able to dive into more details about how the discussion deliberation will be framed in Remesh regarding the Phoenix plan? Okay, great. Yeah. What I can say is that, first of all, likely it's going to be a set of deliberations. So it's not just going to be one session that lasts an hour or 2 hours. It actually might be several sessions, each of which might last a week and can be done asynchronously, what are called flex sessions. So not everyone needs to be involved at the same time, and that they will build on each other. And then some might deal with the more pressing issues up front. And then the later sessions will deal with the more long-term issues over time. And some of those prompts will be generated from the Phoenix document, including the many solutions that are offered in that document, as well as the sort of larger scale outcomes and the overarching principles. And those will be bounced off of the participants, who can also generate their own principles, solutions, and outcomes. So in part, it'll be what we have already will be a prompt for a larger discussion, and we'll see what comes up, what new material comes up, and what existing material might just be affirmed. And then the Phoenix plan and tools are all good, but how will this be tabled before decision makers such that they actually get included in country policies? Okay, yes, thank you, Pearly Wisdom. That is Pearly Wisdom itself. I think what our hope is to provide a completely transparent process, so that all of the data that's being collected, which again is anonymous, but all of these responses, and as you just saw, the results that are broken down are publicly available. And so we are hoping that then that is something that advocacy groups, the peace-building community, government officials can tap into and use to show where there's common ground and to push, knowing that there's less risk in taking steps that might have no support. I should note, we've mentioned Northern Ireland a few times. One of the clinch aspects of the peace process there was polling that was done. It wasn't this deliberative, interactive polling. It was your straight up traditional one-way polling. But it showed the leadership that the public was more ready for an end to the conflict, to the troubles, for integrated schools and neighborhoods than the leaders thought was the case. So that's similarly what we anticipate to happen here. It will show leadership, decision-making, policymakers, both within Israel and Palestine and beyond it, that there is a greater mandate for a new future than currently seems to be the case, where we only hear the loudest, squeakiest voices coming from the extremes.
I will say that often they're not squeaky, they are violent and loud. About that point, what we hope to get is not just the specifics, but also that we will see how we can use AI and deliberative technology in order to float up the principles, the guiding principles that right now this is framed as like security and justice, but we can have I will say the masses involved in a process that we can find new values to put as something that we want to see, like agency and inclusion, like security and safety, not just security from a national security, military security, but also safety, how we integrate safety, not just into the conversation and process, but that we signal to the decision makers what the people want them to talk about. The second thing is that in prolonged violent conflicts like we have in Israel, Palestine, there are underlying psychological and emotional challenges that we need to overcome. And one of them is something that we call meta perceptions. That you see that a lot of Israeli Jews in my society, they don't form their opinions about their values or their knowledge, but a main factor in their deciding what they believe and what they support is built on what they assume that the other side believes and supports. And by creating not just a uninational, but a binational consensus-seeking effort, we can also shape the public conversation and shatter the misconceptions and the stereotypes, specifically those who goes with victimhood and dehumanization and demonization of the other, and show that we can break those meta perceptions, or we can even reshape those meta perceptions in a more constructive, humanizing, empathy-driven roles or ways.
All right. Thanks for that, Eran. I don't know if anyone else had any responses on our team here. I think we captured all the questions. Eran, did you see Chip? Yeah, what are the challenges for NSL moving forward? What are concrete things I can do to help? So I think this is a great segue. We have a number of calls to action for you all that Caroline will share, and we're also going to be taking a picture of the group, and we'd love if anyone who could put themselves onto camera. We'll capture you all as participants in a group picture. I'll give it to you, Caroline.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Tarek, and thank you everyone for being with us this afternoon and for your kind words. We are really, really, really looking for more and more support. So it's very, very heartening to hear from all of you. So we thank you. We leave you now with some calls to action and how you can help. The first thing is to review the plan. It is long, but there is the ChatGPT sort of hack that can get your way through it. But we are actively taking back feedback, and feedback has been very, very, very helpful for us. Secondly, share the plan with your networks, or you can invite New Story leadership to present the plan to your organization or your networks. We are interested in building a base of support both in government and civil society. So please, Alex dropped my name in the chat here. So please do reach out to us for any ideas for collaboration. And Tarek?
Great. Now, if you're interested in any of the digital deliberation aspects of our session here, a few things. First of all, I recommend you go to the website of the Council on Technology and Social Cohesion, which I'd mentioned earlier on. I'll drop the link to that in the chat in just a minute. You can also check out the websites directly for the two different platforms that we've referenced: Polis, which is POL.is, and Remesh, which is remesh.com. I'll put those links as well in the chat shortly. And you can, again, with Polis, you can start an account right now and start fiddling around with it. Remesh, if you just want to test, you can also do that without having to pay for an account. Finally, I want to give a shout out to the Alliance for Peacebuilding, organizers of PeaceCon here. Their communities of practice, one of which is the Digital Peacebuilding Community of Practice, which Nick, one of the organizers here today, helps coordinate. I think it's probably easy to go to the AFP website and find out where there you can sign up They have monthly meetings on a variety of digital peace building topics, including things like Remesh and Polis that we talked about today. All right, and I think with that, we're ready to close up. We're actually closing up early. We'll stick around, I think, until the end of our slot here. If anyone wants to talk, ask questions, if you can come on camera, we'll take a picture of you all, and in just a moment, I'll put on the links that I just referenced.
On a personal note, I want to say that we are in the middle of a really, really difficult time and a very traumatic time. And the fact that people that are not Israelis or Palestinians take not just interest, but also empower our voices is something that is inspiring and strengthening and give us also motivation to work towards the fact that we know that we're not alone and that our people that we can assume that is not from self-interest because they see how this conflict is also exporting toxicity and tension to their homes and societies, but they take real interest from the humanity part of it. So I call upon you to continue to do the work and to share on social media or in person with your families and friends and professional circles and communities about the experience you had here today. We need more stories that will let our story out. I wrote in one of the prompts, I wrote that the people who are closest to the pain should be also closest to power. And this is something that we are trying to get across, that our voices and our stories, young Israelis and Palestinians that live here, that grew up here, that understand the true price of war, and that our generation and our future is being sacrificed right now, that our voices should be empowered and that our voices should be heard, and we need your help to do that.
All right, thanks, Eran. We'll sit with that awkward silence for a few more seconds. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Appreciate you all.